Okay, well, good afternoon, and firstly, many thanks to the AWS team for inviting me to speak with you this afternoon. I'm actually not going to say as much as I planned, partly due to the points that were made previously, because one of the things that's happening with the new health and social care network is a little bit more convergence with the approach to PSM. But also something that Mike mentioned, what's being learned with each of these networks is being passed to the other. So there is some new thinking with HSCN, which is more advanced, a little bit more flexible than PSM, and that will be passed downstream to when the PSN or whatever successor network has evolved. But at some point, they will converge. That's one of the things, the themes that's developing in government, is that the networks will converge. I've also mentioned here a colleague of mine, Mark Hall, who's our public sector director. I'm going to just skip through the points I'm making today, but he gave a webcast on Friday called The Move from N3 to HSCN, which is on the Redcentric website, so that's redcentricplc.com, and that lasts about an hour. Is quite detailed, so if anything interests you here, do have a look at that, as well as reaching out to the AWS team and myself if you so wish. Okay, so I'm just going to cover a few things around Redcentric's experience, the sector trends and challenges as we see them. Why Redcentric? A little bit of a punctuation point there. Where is M3 now? In particular, just to emphasize, the M3 connectivity into AWS UK region is available now. Our first customers go live in the next couple of weeks. So we are taking orders for connectivity to the current M3 network for those that require it. What is HSCN? The benefits as we understand them, timelines for delivery, what we think are the opportunities, both for end user organisations, what are being termed consumers, and also ISVs, solution providers, systems integrators, etc. A little bit around the assurance, which is covered in more detail by my colleague Mark Hall in that webcast, as I mentioned earlier. And then a little bit more detail around the timelines. Again, as you noticed, Mike said earlier that it'll be live from September this year, and I'll explain the run-up to that. So N3 will continue to operate from now. There'll be a transition network, so there'll be the M3 network, there'll be a separate transition network, and then there'll be the HSCN network, which comes on stream. And then M3 will finally decommission sometime March, April 2019. That's the plan. Okay, a few things about us, so I'll just let you read some points there. The main thing to highlight is that we've been involved in NHS Net, N3, and hopefully Health and Social Care Network for some considerable time. We primarily built our business up as a commercial aggregator. So we primarily existed to connect commercial entities that meet the requirements for connectivity to the network. We used to work in parallel with what was the Health and Social Care Information Centre, so you would apply to them with your IGSOC, and then once that had been satisfied, we would grant you connectivity. As a commercial aggregator now, we actually run the entire process end to end. So we onboard our solution providers and our ISVs, and we submit IG toolkits on their behalf into NHS Digital on an annual basis. So we run the entire process, and that's what we're offering to AWS customers, is we'll onboard you, which I'll cover some of those processes in a minute, and we'll do that free of charge as part of our normal activity. But the main thing is that we've been doing this for some considerable time, and we are the largest commercial aggregator by far, and we implement, or we have operational about 1 in 5 of all M3 connections by number. So sector trends and challenges. One has been around unification of health and care, in particular health and social care. One has been collaboration even within an organisation, but particularly across the healthcare community, and very much so across the health and care community. Key issue is eroding budgets. Austerity is a reality for local government, and it's an imperative for the health or the NHS sector. So the requirement to reduce cost is absolute. And coming back to a question the gentleman asked at the back, one of the pressures that I think will ease the challenge around trying to use the internet is that the cost for HSCN will be dramatically below that which you're currently experiencing for M3. So it's bringing into the market much more of the commercial type pricing that you've associated with business class services in the commercial sector. Again, we've been subject to quite complex assurance processes, and in particular multiple governance regimes. An attempt is being made to simplify that with HSCN and with the customer focused on the coded connection at the network and their CNSP, their consumer network service provider, supporting them to actually take their environment through the accreditation. So trying to take a little bit of the load, not the responsibility, but a little bit of the load off the consumer, off the user organisation. In theory, there's a lot of overcapacity in terms of network connections that customers have. So we know customers with PSN connections, internet connections, M3 connections, even Janet connections, for example, with teaching hospitals. So there's a lot of inefficiency in the provision of network services. And again, with HSCN, some attempt has been made to streamline that and get it ready for, as I said earlier, that convergence with the PSN network. Quite complex management processes exist at the moment with M3, and in particular quite slow implementation and change processes with the current M3 service provider. It's something that we've attempted to overcome as a commercial aggregator with our ISV customers. So you will experience an agile implementation for connecting to M3 in AWS London region. But for NHS logos, dealing with the M3 SP, it's still quite a challenge. And the approach of HSCN is to remove that barrier in terms of the change timescales, which impact obviously on things such as continuous development mentalities and implementation times. A couple of things about us, as well as on the M3 aggregation side, we are also a PSN certified provider. Interestingly, which you might think is unusual given what we're doing today, we own and operate our own data centers and we run our own cloud services, but in reality is our customers are going into the public cloud. But the key thing is we are PSN certified, which means we have the ability to certify services for delivery over the PSN, and that includes now the consideration of AWS services certified for delivery over PSN, something to bear in mind. Something also relative to that is that we are a G-Cloud supplier. We've been one since 2012, and we deliver assured services via G-Cloud. And for those in the room with particularly aggregated data sets, we can offer up to official sensitive with additional controls. So where is M3 now? The main thing is it will cease to be, as I said, sometime March, April 2019. And the reason it's going to cease is because it is of a certain age. It is a network that's very old, some 14 years old in terms of the design. It's not, for example, an MPLS network. It is only provided by one provider. So the combination of an old design and a single provider equals high cost and slow change. The SLA is relatively poor by modern standards, so even standard SLA on M3 from the service provider is 99.5%. uptime for resilient connectivity. For HSCN, by default, the core will operate at 5 nines. So it's a completely different mentality. Challenge currently on the cost, and as I said earlier, quite significant challenges with the current M3 network for for NHS organisations when it comes to implementing connections and even implementing subsequent change. However, it is what it is, and customers do require to access it as it currently exists. So we have implemented a solution, resilient access solution, so that you can implement M3 facing virtual private clouds from the UK region, and as I said, that's live from next month, and we're taking orders now. And that's the result of quite significant collaboration between ourselves and AWS. It's interesting how these things are converging with the recent announcement from GDS in terms of their guidance around public clouds for the public sector, the transition of M3 into HSCN. Things are beginning to move in a positive direction, both for the ISV and systems integrator community, but also for the NHS, and in particular for social care departments in local government. So this is our current process. This is for onboarding customers onto M3 in the AWS UK region. Essentially, for those that have experience of it, what the commercial aggregator, such as ourselves, does is we take on the IGSOC activity that you used to have to apply directly to the Health and Social Care Information Centre for. So we guide you through that. We actually manage that submission. So we take that responsibility and we report to what is NHS Digital Now for that. And that's a full end-to-end process from business justification through to ready for service. And we currently manage, for the ISV and SI community, about 80 to 90 IGTs per annum. So we're doing this for quite a few organisations. Okay, the fundamental thing that's different, and again Mike touched on it earlier about HSCN compared to M3, beginning with that bottom piece, is the disaggregation of the provision and the entry of multiple suppliers. So M3 will be made up of HSCN will be made up of two network elements with some monitoring and analysis on top of that. The first network element is the peer and exchange service, which is essentially the core of the new HSCN network. And again, to give you a guide compared to how it was with M3 or how it is, that will operate at a minimum 10 gig to 40 and then on to 100 gig at the core. So it's an enhanced MPLS design, highly resilient as you might expect, 5 nines availability and up to 100 gig transit. And then on the right hand side you've got a set of service providers, what are known as consumer network service providers. They will be the organisations that both the ISV, SI community and the NHS and social care community will engage to get their connectivity. So for the first time, CNSPs, unlike commercial aggregators, will be able to engage both NHS organisations and commercial organisations such as ISVs. There'll also be quite a few CNSPs, which means you will have choice. That's quite important. It's very important. It also creates an imperative for us as service providers to perform. It means you can negotiate shorter term contracts at lower cost, and if the service provider doesn't perform, you can change. That is not the situation that NHS organisations currently enjoy with the M3 service provider. So that's a fundamental change by disaggregating the delivery of the design and delivery of the network, and then, as I said, giving the customers the choice. The other thing that's going to happen is that there'll be a proactive approach to security. So all traffic in and out of the network will be monitored, captured, analysed and acted upon. It will assume that threats exist and attacks happen. As we know this week, in fact only a week and a half ago with Barts, for those in London that are aware, Barts was out effectively, large parts of Barts Hospital and NHS Trust were out of action for about 4 days. So this is happening. 30% of 94 NHS trusts that responded to an FOI request said that they were subject to ransomware. So there's a big emphasis with HSCN on the fact that these issues do exist, so there's a much more proactive approach to security. I'm being rushed on, so I'll just skip a few on. So just a few things I want to highlight here. One, the emphasis on the security and the proactive element of the security. So there'll be active monitoring of the network, a network and analysis service. NHS Digital will create a security operations centre. Both the peer and exchange service provider and the consumer network service providers will work with that organisation. Again, it was mentioned earlier by Mike when issues existed that things would sometimes get lost or it would take time to get things sorted out. NHS Digital have created a mediation service, and those service providers will be on 30-minute timelines to either fix issues or make progress. So there'll be a lot of pressure on the service providers. The key thing is about HSCN, as I said earlier, is to create a joined up health and social care connectivity solution, more resilient, more available, more scalable and significantly less cost. So for most organisations it's going to bring immediate benefits, and in particular details such as the top right there around things like layered service. So you'll be able to implement things like QoS at a local level. You'll be able to implement voice over IP, collaborative solutions, unified comms. You've not been able to do that today easily, and that will be now possible. So again, just emphasising things like the reduction in costs, simplification of management, overlay services I mentioned just now, and the access to social care. Key thing in terms of a change will be the governance. So essentially, customers, end user organisations or consumers will have a connection agreement which will be all about the network access, authentication, user access, how they control access to personal identifiable data. And then the consumer network service provider who provides the connectivity will work with them around the infrastructure and the applications to security and assurance associated with that. And we will, organisations like ourselves that aspire to be CNSPs will then have reporting obligations into NHS Digital on that aspect. And this is emphasised here, as I mentioned earlier, around the fact that NHS Digital will have a security operations centre. Traffic will be analysed, and there'll be content checking for malware, etc. at the internet breakout. And that analysis of traffic will be 100% of all traffic coming in and out of the network. It's 100%. So every CNSP will be obligated to be doing this. Focus will be on maintaining the availability of the network, and therefore of the services that depend on it, as was mentioned earlier by Mike, around affecting real people, patients, citizens. And emphasis in the community around securing the data rather than the transport layer. The transport layer, the idea behind that is it will be a proactively monitored network. Just a little bit of detail here because it just demonstrates some of the change. All internet connections on HSCN will have a layer 4 firewall. That's mandated. They'll set the rules for that, the baseline rules. That rule set will be changed, or could be changed, certainly will be up for change every 24 hours, obviously in line with the threat. But for the first time, you'll be able to use virtualized firewalls. So that's things like context on Cisco firewalls and VDOMs on Fortinets. So, as mentioned earlier by Mike, around the fact that, and I just touched on it myself, the fact is that the service providers, the multiple service providers, will be subject to a mediation process involving NHS Digital and their Security Operations Centre. The idea behind this is to ensure that they work together, they're compelled to work together, they're contractually obligated to work together to ensure that you get the best possible service. For those that are in the NHS and have had the misfortune of dealing with the M3 service provider, if you submitted calls and requests for support, you're not necessarily going to get the quickest response. This mechanism is about ensuring you get very, very quick responses. Because with multiple CNSPs, if things change, or if they don't give a good enough service, then you, the customer, can change. So, timelines. The three things are going to happen towards the end of April. One, the peering exchange will be set up. Two, the transition network that BT will run as service provider will be set up. Let me repeat, you will only have to make one transition, so you won't have to transition to the transition network and then on to HSCN. The idea behind the transition network is that if you've got points on the network that are M3 and points that are HSCN, people will be able to connect to each other. Transition network will be ending in April. First CNSPs will be connected from April for pilot migrations that will commence around about July, within 10 weeks at the end of April. And the early adopter migrations in September, and then finally what's called the waves of migrations will begin from about December, or certainly the full waves. And what you'll notice, some of you that are in the NHS itself, is the procurement for those waves activity that will start as soon as next month or March. And there'll be a specific procurement around the waves, as I said, for that activity. It will not be done via another framework, it'll be a specific procurement. Our approach is that we'll manage the transitions the migrations for our customers, but they'll be conducted at their pace. And as I said, the network will finally turn off March, April 2019. Okay. Our job will be to support you. As I said, we provide about 15,000 M3 connections already. We are participating in the early stages of HSCN as an adopter. We do intend to do that. So we believe we'll have a significant amount of experience to offer you. It's a very significant part of our business. Healthcare is the biggest part of our business, and public sector therefore is also the biggest part of our business. Accreditations, as I said earlier, you'd expect and demand those by default, but that's just to summarise some of them. So, in summary, and I've been rushed on at the back there, M3 is of a certain age, but it is still operational for a period of time. We're offering M3 connectivity to the AWS UK London region, as I said, live from next month. Standard charging model in place. Notice on Mike's presentation he mentioned 50 meg to 500 meg. We're going to start at 5 meg, so we're offering from 5 megabit bandwidths upwards on M3, in increments above that of 1 megabit. So the idea is to support those organisations that are looking to deploy small and scale incrementally and then grow large. And in summary, I would like to thank you for your time. Any questions before we move on?
You mentioned the very specific timetable to abandon N3 to the the new network.
Mm-hmm.
So N3 have been for almost 10 years until it's been banned, more than 10 years actually. I mean, there's so many investment, it was just banned, and you now have the new network to be implemented. And we keep hearing in the news is NHS don't have budget or even neither from the social care system. So where's the budget going to pay for the new infrastructure? Thank you.
Thank you. Well, very good question. I will try to comment on that rather than answer it, but I'll also take an action, which I'm welcome to somebody to capture, and I'll come back to you if someone can write down your details for me. Essentially, obviously, for us, the authority for us on all these kinds of questions is NHS Digital. Okay. What we have been told, though, is that they are clear about that timetable. They are clear about the procurement waves that I've just mentioned. So you will start to see procurement start occurring for this connectivity, and there'll be contract novations and budget novations from the existing network into the new network. So I think a lot of this, in terms of during that period of change, the idea is that they won't be putting more money in the system, they'll be reallocating existing costs that exist in the system. I think that's, you can imagine that's the way that they'll try and do it, yeah? However, that's during that period of change. Once we start getting into HSCN only contracts, and we're about 2 months away from knowing this, so give us 2 months or so, we do expect quite dramatic cost reductions. So you will be able to sign HSCN connectivity contracts, and you will find that the total cost for those will be significantly less.
We'd like to know what lessons have you learned from, apart from financial, what lessons have you learned from N3 now that you're moving to a new system? And all those of us who have worked with the N3 know the calamity NHS had. So now we're actually moving to a new system. What lessons have you learned from the old one? What to make sure we don't move to new system?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll break that into a simple answer. In life, and this applies to your professional life and also your personal life, ultimately you can only worry about the things over which you have influence. Okay? Now, we don't have influence over the design of the network as it currently stands, nor are we the authority, let's be clear, regarding the design of the new network. Yeah? We're not the authority regarding the design of the new network. What we can influence are our own behaviours, and this is why I think we're working with AWS. This is not, I can't speak for them, I can speak for myself. But when we work with AWS and when we're working with today's customer, what they want is they want an organisation that's responsive, they want an organisation that will listen, not tell them that we're this size and we've done this much. All of that, even this I show you on the board here, is all I'm asking is for that to be considered to qualify to speak with you, not to convince you, to speak with you, to get your time. After that, I have to demonstrate, are we sufficiently responsive? Are we listening to you? Are we centred on you? Are we sensible about things like our charging models and our costs? Are they transparent? Are the contract terms short? Do we allow you to incrementally grow, et cetera, et cetera? So I think it's as much about our behaviours in terms of not necessarily learning anything about M3 as such. We did realise that we'd have to behave differently to the M3 service provider. It's not a criticism of them because they're probably just working in line with their contract. Our view was that contract's not working for customers. You can't have an ISV that is depending on that market for their business to wait 6 months to get a connection. It's not that doesn't work for their business, and you, as a provider, you're not adding value to them. In fact, you're impeding them. So our view was, what could we change ourselves so we act faster, we are responsive, we are flexible, and we like to feel we listen.